Usually at companies who are going through high periods of growth, you hear the same thing. They hear, I'm too busy. I'm too busy to learn. I'm too busy to actually take on a skill set that will better the organization and better my efficiency, right? I'm too busy to hire that person that who's going to help take off
Yeah.
work from my plate. But this is really where, as leadership, we step in and we say, what's actually important to us? Is learning and development important, or are we just saying that? And if it is, are we putting the appropriate time aside to allow people, maybe it's a half day on a Friday or whatever the case may be, to allow people to have this, a self-education time or team learning time. So that's a critical piece as well.
Welcome back to everybody. And today we are honored to have here with us Tanya Morton, Senior HR Leader. Welcome, Tanya. We're so excited to have this conversation together.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Excited to
No
jump in.
problem. Yes, absolutely. So you have a ton of experience with growing teams and scaling companies. So I would love to just get started to hear your thoughts about how do you maintain a consistent culture of leadership and performance when you're growing, and let's pick with a startup to an enterprise size. Um, you know,
Yeah, fantastic question. Okay, so scaling companies, you're growing really fast. Usually that means lots of work, lots of people running in a million different directions, growing head count. Things are moving really quickly. It's definitely one of those slow down to speed up kind of recommendations, and that is alignment. It's getting the decision makers, the hiring leads on the same page using the same set of core criteria. What is most important to us as we scale? Who are we as a company and what do we look for in high performers, in key contributors? Is it people who value honesty, candor? Is it people who have an entrepreneurial mindset? How do we assess for that in candidates that are coming through? So there's consistency of measure right out of the gates. And then there's consistency of ongoing measurement as well. Are people being held accountable to those core criteria, not only that you were initially hiring for, but that you continue to scale for? This way, it's trainable, it's repeatable, it's consistent, and you can really maintain some of those core values and core pieces that are most important to you as an organization as you grow. So that would really be my in a nutshell.
That's huge. I mean, right out the gate, you come out with a big one, and it's talking about picking the right people at the table from the get-go, and then nurturing those same sets of values that you used to select them, to nurture them and keep them accountable and measurable throughout the life cycle of the employee experience and as the company changes. That's a big one to start. So, and I know you mentioned some of the criteria there, some of the characteristics that could come up in this conversation, but I just wonder, obviously, you have to look at them differently when you're, yay or nay on hiring versus a measurement approach, further on down the experience. So I just wonder if you can share with us a little bit how a criteria, an example, if it comes to mind, about how a characteristic can kind of, be one way, and then kind of how does it support the experience as the employee goes on.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, I can think of a number of things that would be critical that I look for, regardless if I'm
Hmm.
hiring for a 50-person or a 400-person company. But let's say resiliency as a
Hmm.
trait, right?
Hmm.
So, number one is, does everyone define resiliency in the same way so that we're actually looking for the same thing? Are we measuring it when we're hiring them in the same way? Are we measuring it in the same way at performance reviews or recognition discussions? So, let's say we're all aligned, we've gone through this, a resiliency equals someone who can withstand a lot of change at the organization, come through, be positive, continue with the vision of the company, share that with others. Again, are we recognizing that through key examples during the interview process so we can really pull out, this is someone who strikes me as a resilient person? Then we pull in those examples during those coaching relationships. We're assuming now at this point the person doing those performance reviews or check-ins with that individual is well versed on what it means to be resilient to that company. Using those examples, recognizing them for it. And I'd also recommend recognizing on a broader scale, whether it be a town hall or, the department lead or the CEO or however small or big your company is or whatever aligns with your culture, also coming in to reinforce that so others can see what is that? How is that behavior modeled and how can I emulate it? Really
Oh,
that
that's
starts.
so interesting. I love that actually, my resiliency, one of my favorite traits to talk about, truly. It's so interesting because you would say it's hard to measure resiliency, right? Because it's such an intangible. But actually, the way you shared it by defining it, aligning across, and then actually, measuring pulse checks on, how resilient a person is, you could actually make any trait measurable. Is that true in your opinion?
Would agree. Yeah, I
Okay.
think, as long as there's alignment on what the definition means, it can become measurable. Having those discussions, what does this really mean to us, is critical, though.
So I know that you work with many companies, with such a rich experience. I know you worked in the let's say education sector, and obviously, well, I know we both have kids, and even not having kids recognizes that it's such a unprecedented stress on that industry and sector, that's happening right now. How does that external pressure on your customer base, do you find that it affects internal leadership approaches? And although maybe as a leader internally it's not the same, does it seep into the practices or even performance and well-being initiatives, just because by nature we're working in that industry?
Yeah, so much to unpack on that one, and I'm gonna
Mhm.
try and give you as
Fair.
brief of an answer as I can. So, and even prior to working in the education sector, I worked in health tech during the time of the pandemic. So I
Right.
really
Right.
external pressure and that sense of urgency, and that need, really isn't something like, isn't new to me as it pertains to working
Okay.
for a company with that kind of culture. And, what I really how I've really seen that done well is translating that external pressure into empowering the individual, like the team players at the organization, and really adding that to the employee value proposition. So I work somewhere that's actually making a difference, that's actually changing something. And I've really found, particularly in today's more emerging workforce, as some of the newer folks to the working world, purpose driven are really, really resonate and give you that key differentiator. So not only to, from a recruitment standpoint, how are we advertising, but internally, directly, your client is feeling this. How are we bringing that voice into the organization? How are we putting their voice on a pedestal? And how are we getting really creative about how we solve their issues, not only as a customer service representative or account manager who's speaking to the client every day, but as a broader org? Something that I've done is, at two of the last organizations I've been at, I've started a client speaker series. So, an initiative where cross functional folks from different departments could volunteer to join this group. We'd actually bring customers in to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, maybe in some cases how our product is solving some of the issues and maybe some of the challenges or gaps, but really brought that rowing in the same direction to solve the client's need and being customer focused to the core of the
Oh,
company.
that's a cool tip, right? Or share right there about connecting, right? The customers internally. That's all, of course, that's all in the business books 101, right? Like to stay close to the customers. I always love highlighting practical ways to do that because sometimes it can feel very disconnected, being in a part of a tech company. Again, serving in education or health care, it can feel like very disconnected. But bringing in that voice right into the building is actually it's such a great idea. I love how you mentioned the going back to your other point, the purpose in roles. You make sure to help to set the right mindset and right frame of mind for how to look at situation. And of course, mindset is such a powerful tool. I love the idea of using this external can be seen as a negative experience, but turning it into a positive tool to help everybody connect to the purpose that they have in their job. Do you have any kind of quantified way to consider, you know, um, the effect of, like, let's say, purpose or alignment or some of these key characteristics? You look at them as a specific suite of characteristics that you are looking to build in leaders.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, an interesting way to put it, and again, I could kind of unpack it in a few ways. So, when you say, a quantifiable thing,
Mhm.
um, first we want to see, which teams, which departments, which, not individuals because it's anonymous, but which teams are really feeling close to the customer. In our employee engagement surveys, we actually put,
Mm.
we are solving real customer problems. We listen to the feedback of our customers. I understand, my customers' challenges, and that question goes out, role agnostically. It could go to an engineer, it can go to a customer service representative. So first we really find that out. It's more of a bottom up approach on that front. Which teams really feel close? Which teams could benefit from maybe a Q&A session with someone who is more frontline? Or let's check Are these folks able to attend the customer sessions when they
Right,
come?
right.
Maybe, in the case of a dev team, maybe they were fixing a bug and they were unable to, and can we record it? How can we really solve that and talk to the folks too on the ground after you get the data as well? Big believer in data empowerment, not only being data doing everything. So, and working with their leaders, of course, throughout that process to show the importance, to encourage attendance to things like this or listening to the recording after, and to make sure that the leaders appreciate and value what it is that we're trying to do by bringing in that customer focus.
Awesome. So you talk about top down, kind of defining what it really takes for success, being aligned to that, and then bottom up, getting input and direction. And then there's a lot of work there to close those gaps. But it's interesting that the data and direction can come from top or bottom up. I love that. I'd love to ask you a little bit about. We talked about growth and difficult industries. So already I gave you two big doozies. Let me keep going. So I know that you worked in Toronto headquarters with the North American reach. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit about how you consider building sustainable leadership practices with the distributed teams, and then especially in a post-pandemic environment with some of these like changes that are being managed by different kinds of workforce and generations that are all in play these days.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It seems like it's ever changing. You hear the news. Oh, there's a big call back to office from a lot of government workers as
Hmm.
well, going back to 5 days. Other companies have really
Yeah.
embraced that distributed workforce. Others are global. Um, yeah, I think it really comes back to, are we aligned on what the business strategy is? Have we gotten together as a leadership team? Is it cascading appropriately? Are there any broken chains in the link, quite frankly? So to reuse your words, you know, top down, bottom up, are we measuring that alignment piece from both sides? So again, aligning on the key objectives as the organization continues to grow. What's the status of each of those? Are we still aligned that this makes sense for our business? Everyone in scale up companies is probably nodding their head right now that from one quarter to the next, you can have some very key things move, and you have to change it up. That
Yeah.
waterfall approach of annual goals does not always work for companies that are growing at that kind of a rapid rate. So that alignment piece is key, and making sure that it cascades effectively is key. And then, because of course I'm in human resources and people and culture, values remain very important. Are we still aligned on where company values are? Did we define these 5 years ago when we were 25 people sitting around a table and now we're 200 people in three different countries? Do these values still resonate with us as an organization? And would there be value, like a good ROI in hitting reset as an organization?
Well, I love it. Like I love it actually when really complicated questions and situations when we can cut through the noise of that with the back to fundamentals. So I love, when we think about global team distribution, COVID, back to work, all this noise, and it can be like your head spins, but then actually really coming back to business strategy, objectives, alignment, ooh, values, and then looking at ROI. And you just kind of listed them, but I mean, I just love how the basics cut through the noise. Yeah, awesome. Um, I was going to ask you about how do you find leadership practices, do you find that you change them or you leave room for change for recognizing the ebb and flow of the growth of company? Or how do you find from the HR perspective to help manage that, so that we in building sustainable performance practices with the recognition of, these really high growth and push phases?
Well, how do we support those big periods of push? And
Right.
same from
Yeah.
a leadership perspective as well. How do we reinforce that? I just wanna make sure I understand.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Perfect.
Yeah, so when you hire leadership, so getting it right in the outset on people who are capable of handling that kind of a boom, or at least have the supports in place to make sure that we as an organization can support what it takes to do something like that. What do I mean? I mean, and I'm speaking from, a high growth company. Oftentimes people are homegrown, right? It's someone who was an excellent senior engineer who expressed interest in wanting to be a team lead, and now they're suddenly find themselves as a director of engineering, needing an entirely different skill set. One that the
Yeah.
organization is willing to support in order to retain this individual, but not necessarily skills that they have at their grasp. So, do we early recognize this person's moving into this role. We know we're a high growth company. What do we want to teach them now, today, that 6 months down the line when we have this big boom, they're ready to go? As well as more of that just in time training as well, because they don't know, folks don't always retain it 6 months ago, right? But so, what are like the core foundational skills? How do they have access to the help they need later on? Do they have a mentor that they can tap on within the organization to ensure that success? Or if you're in the position that you can afford hiring someone who is that A player and comes from that history of success, it's a good idea to have a mix of those folks, of people who have that been there, done that kind of individual, know what it takes to be successful. But again, oftentimes
Yeah.
companies are paving a new way, using the expression you always hear, building the plane while flying it.
Yeah.
And really, it's about trying to get ahead of things as early as you can and trying to prepare as best you can. Be honest about gaps. Encourage individual leadership to be honest about their gaps as well, and really allow them to address that in a celebrated fashion.
Perfect. You brought up that one of my favorite things to kind of unpack a bit for sure is how to advance leaders. And especially, I started my career in tech, so I it's easy for me to think about that. Sometimes when you have technical resources, giving them a path forward that doesn't necessarily include management being a prerequisite for success or higher compensation packages. That doesn't, that's not a leader make. You don't want to force somebody up in that role because they feel like they have to keep moving up, right? Like that way. But the idea is also like how to prepare on the flip side of, not forcing them up, how to prepare sometimes technical resources who would be really great people leaders, but require some people, development, or even really some of the like leadership skills or business acumen that might not be something they've honed as a part of a technical career.
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder
Okay.
if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. So two-parter. So the first one is people who are excellent independent contributors, great ICs. Maybe they don't have an interest, or maybe like the skill set is just the gap is just too broad to move them into a team lead position. Well, whatever the reason might be, they're a strong individual contributor. How do you justify salary being as
Yeah,
high,
yeah, yeah,
comparable to someone who does lead a team? And honestly, it really depends on the organization. I've been at organizations where, depending on the role of the individual contributor, there's a willingness and an appetite to still pay that high salary level. So, it's a senior database engineer. Maybe it's justifiable to pay a higher level of salary, and that's just fine. Maybe it's a role where, it's hard to justify that. In which case, how can we increase the salary, not be overly married to the box of what that role is, and how could they really expand their contributions? Perhaps they don't want to lead teams, but maybe they could generate training materials for other people, or you name it. You can get really creative about how you think about that, but expanding the scope wide as opposed to that depth.
right.
Um, and that's really where I've seen some of the barriers broken down between, well, the only next level is for them to manage a team. There's no
Yes.
other next level. They've hit their ceiling, and then you end up losing the individual, right? They leave for another
Yes,
organization or
it's just not it's a, lose-lose it feels like a lose-lose setup a lot of times. I've seen it firsthand, and I've talked to leaders who really struggle with this. So I'm always curious how companies are handling it. I love your answer about being creative about, increasing scope so you can justify the different compensation growth while also being fair and transparent, right, with the others. So I know it leaves a room for creativity, but some of these things I think take that, right? Like it's difficult to have everything perfectly like graded.
it is. I know companies also, where you expand the scope, are we going to lose this person if they have sort of the two
Right.
roles, or they're having this, but I've seen the opposite. You give someone the opportunity. What does growth mean to you? You have that
What does
conversation.
growth mean to you? That's a great question. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what would really be meaningful to you, and you go from there, and taking that time for those people who are really high performers in that way. And then the second part of your question had to do with gaps around, someone is excellent. They are identified as an early leader in the organization. How do we retain them, grow them? And there's so many amazing programs that you could tap on. And what I mean by that is, we can talk about internal training, we can talk about external training. Usually a blend of those two things are great. So from an internal training perspective, is there someone we can assign in the organization who's an excellent team lead they can learn from, shadow, Are there, internal management training programs we might be able to make so that we can teach our leadership consistent methods of delivering feedback, or you name it? That there's external training programs that you could do. Of course, a ton of courses out there if you're willing to offer a stipend for education. And then the other sorry, I love this topic. Can you
Yeah,
tell?
totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
The other option as well is there's a number of government funding programs that offer reimbursements for companies that are investing in training, that be internal or external, up to 50% of training program coverage. It becomes a much easier business case to make to the
Yeah.
finance when you want to roll out a new training
Yeah.
and development program.
Yes, those are really helpful and likely sort of helpful resources and thought provoking paths. But likely, like you said, it's probably a blend that it takes, right? So somebody has to really look at this and then maybe even leave room for some personalization, right? For that, what is the gaps for the person, which kind of leaves room with your like the stipend for education. That's probably a very helpful flex benefit. That's come to tech resources. But you have to do some learning, right? So leadership is not something, I think that's kind of the underneath all the answers. Leadership is not something that just happens. It's a proactively learned skill to put into practice and make it your own and make it work within the organization.
Totally. And there's so much free learning courses out there and things they could really capitalize on. Usually at companies who are going through high periods of growth, you hear the same thing. They hear, I'm too busy. I'm too busy to learn. I'm too busy to actually take on a skill set that will better the organization and better my efficiency, right? I'm too busy to hire that person that who's going to help take off
Yeah.
work from my plate. But this is really where, as leadership, we step in and we say, what's actually important to us? Is learning and development important, or are we just saying that? And if it is, are we putting the appropriate time aside to allow people, maybe it's a half day on a Friday or whatever the case may be, to allow people to have this, a self education time or team learning time. So that's a critical piece as well.
You you've obviously been a part of growth from again from startup to enterprise size. Is there a pattern you notice when companies are big enough to start the L&D investment? Um,
Great question. And interesting about the pattern. Quite frankly, I'm going to give you the same probably frustrating answer, and that is it depends. Like, so at Kev Group, education based, obviously,
yes.
fintech company really values education, even at a smaller size. They really started putting programs in place that encouraged internal learning and development and training, an external training stipend as well, and invested in someone at an L&D senior manager level at quite a small size. So not necessarily tied to headcount, but just something that was a core value of theirs. Um, at think research, a little bit different. There was a very strong focus on internal learning. We were really bootstrapped there for a very long time, so really wanted to leverage the internal learning piece, and again, got very creative about how we did that. There was such a plethora of knowledge there, and so many individuals who would teach dev boot camps or were nurse managers, and bringing those two together was just is such an interesting time and great for internal knowledge sharing through the consultancy group, Sky Blue Sky. Many of the clients are in the not-for-profit sector, and that's a very interesting one as well for being bootstrapped, but really doing a lot of internal learning. So to make a long answer long here, usually it depends on internal appetites, willingness from the executive team to invest, because it's not just like the monetary, like direct monetary investment, it's also that time component. But the earlier the better. You can really tie it closely to ROI, whether it be an L&D focus on sales enablement and or bringing folks up to speed really, really quickly. Perhaps it's even just a part of an HR team member role, but how can we expedite the onboarding process to get people efficient and contributing much faster? How do we measure that? How do we get sales individuals selling faster, understanding the customer more, solving the customer pain points quicker? So I think that there's a very good, easy business case for it. Again, really, really dependent on the company's growth size, though.
So first of all, it makes sense. It depends, and I love how you notice the tie to core values, and then ultimately willingness to invest with the consideration of how you're going to get the investment back for the company objectives and goals. Because, like we said earlier, it always goes back to the business results, right, and the enablement of the business. It's nice to get that answer from HR as well, because sometimes it feels like you're going to talk more about people stuff. That's like, the traditional thing, but there's people, yes, but it's still business.
100%. I think, as like for the HR professionals who might be listening to this or taking the
Yeah.
feedback from it, it can be challenging as in, let's call it, to oversimplify it, like an internal services team, right? We're often seen as people who spend the money, not people who bring the
Yes.
revenue in the
Yes.
door. And the more often you can tie uh, actions, programs, policies, processes to dollars, the easier it actually makes your life and your job. And so many of the things that HR teams are looking to roll out have that direct tie. Folks just haven't figured out how to tie it to that.
Yes. Yes. That's why these examples are very helpful, because that's exactly, I think that's the challenge. There is totally a way to do it. It's just that's not, how sometimes we think about it. So that's one of the things we're really looking to share with these conversations. Thank you so much for that. So I know we talked quite a bit about bringing in data to the conversation, marrying it up with some of the softer people side of things. But is there anything on the flip side? Is there anything that you can share about the data that might have surprised you versus, what drives leadership or retention or performance versus what we might think it does? And then you see later the results and you're like, surprised.
Yeah, and this can be outside of the L&D context or yeah. Yeah, so something that's really, that we speak to our like clients consistently about is it's not just about the flashy title of a policy that you're willing to that you want to roll out.
Yeah.
A lot of companies are talking about work-life balance. What does that mean? I've got people are really wanting that right now. That's this competitive edge as an employer. One client that we had worked with had said, we're having this really interesting challenge of people are complaining about burnout. We're having these issues with attrition, but we've got this unlimited vacation policy, and we're attracting people. People are really interested in working with us. What's going on here? We don't understand. When we spoke to the leadership, when we spoke to the team members, when we looked at the data, what was really interesting was this incredible unlimited vacation policy. On average, people across the company were only taking 7.5 days of vacation. There was this sentiment of you take too much or you take too many in a row, you're abusing this policy. And the company at the stage of growth that they were at thought that this laissez-faire policy was the best way of addressing the issue when really because they were growing so quickly, their management team was inexperienced. They didn't really understand the benefit. And there was that break in communication between the executive team wanting to roll out this policy and frontline managers, what it meant to actually execute successfully on it. We ended up seeing this. This company actually needed the complete opposite.
Right.
They really turn things around slowly and expensively, unfortunately for them, right? Because they have to walk back this unlimited to now parameter based, but it was training the managers. Time off is great. We're going to talk about it in a celebrated fashion. We're going to give people the space. We're going to be intentional about it. We're going to look at who hasn't taken enough vacation this year. We're going to look at quarterly reports or half year reports. If you notice a deficit, encourage your people to take that time off. So it was really the opposite of what they needed.
Okay. I mean, I love that. That's a really great example of sometimes like you don't know what people are. You can't take at word what people might want, and just sounds great, but it's actually backfires completely. What is this something? I wonder if when you're coming into a company, and I know you do this a lot because you're working with different companies. Is there some telltale symptoms you've come to look for? Because I know from your experience, you're in a really good position to comment on just patterns and that you've come to see. So I just wonder if there's any kind of telltale symptoms that you've come to be like, "Oh, yes, let's, double down alignment, or let's look at bottom up what's going on because it smells like it's not a good, healthy environment for growth or sustainable performance."
Yeah, yeah, completely. I mean, this is again, it's a painful one. It's a sore spot, but Glassdoor often, even though you can't control it, and
Right.
you can have one anonymous person who can post a bunch of times, but usually, if you are not out there responding to it as an employer, saying, you know, our environment isn't for everyone. I'm sorry you had this experience, but this is really what's important to us. If you have that opportunity to reiterate that, that can really negatively impact people are reading it. They're
Yeah.
reading it, right? You can try and avoid it, you can try not to talk about it, but if your Glassdoor is bad, there new folks looking at your company that you're looking to recruit are reading it, and internal people are reading it as well. If you use it as an opportunity to reinforce your values, that's really where I've seen it turned around. So that's one that should definitely be addressed. Another piece is low response rate on an engagement survey, it's usually a sign that people's feedback, if people feel like their feedback isn't heard, there's no point. They're not seeing anything actioned from it. And really, how I've addressed turning that around is being deliberate and over communicating, saying at town halls, this is what we've seen, this is what we've heard from you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, don't hide it. Just get it up there. Be honest about it. This is how we plan on addressing it. Please come to us with your suggestions. We need your feedback to make this better. You are our culture. That and being honest about that, again, that's really how I've seen that turned around as well.
Awesome. All right. So, like, thank you so much for sharing. I would love to ask you, just if you had a magic wand that gives you a superpower or solves a critical burning question, what would you, sorry, a challenge, what would your magic wand be about as an HR leader for, scaling high growth companies?
A great question. I mean, am I able to choose anything? Because if I could,
Yes, you can. That's the power of the wand. Like,
yeah, I would say time, something like time for reinvesting in your people, especially junior folks at more junior levels. Like AI is so incredible, such an incredibly powerful tool that people are using, but I often feel like it's robbing a lot of opportunity from people who are entry level, particularly to learn. I remember I had this incredible mentor for almost 8 years. She was my boss, and I would put a legal document. She would get me to draft it. I would put it on her desk and it would be full of red pen. Like that whole thing just lit up. And I just don't, it was wonderful, but she gave me that opportunity to draft it. And I feel like in a world where speed is the priority and the high value item, oftentimes people aren't giving more like these junior tasks to people to learn and to go back and forth and to get those red paper filled
that's a good
things
point.
on their desk. Right.
Yeah, that's a
So
good point. Think of those I've had. I know exactly. I've had the similar versions of my own mentor slash bosses that have done that, have shaped me and my career ultimately. That's a really great point. I've not heard before about how AI could be taking away some of those learning opportunities in earlier stage. As much as it gives them a, a hand up to grow up in an AI native kind of environment,
yeah.
there is something to be said for the learnings that we did early on that way. Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, thank you so much for being with us and sharing some of these very practical and actionable tools from your vast experience. Thank you so much, Tanya.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sandra. It was awesome chatting with you.
Thank you.